Everything just exploded in dancehall, and fans are still trying to process the betrayal that hit within seconds of Vybz Kartel's latest move. One moment, it looked like unity. The next, it turned into a cold public shutdown that people are calling one of the most shocking silent disses in recent memory. No warning, no build-up, just a shift in energy so sharp that the entire industry felt it instantly. Stephen D. Genius didn't just get ignored. He got erased from the conversation in real time, and what makes it worse is how calm everything looked while it was happening. No shouting, no direct war. Just a calculated distance that spoke louder than any diss track ever could. And that's where the tension begins to spiral. Because insiders say this wasn't random at all. Behind the scenes, conversations were happening that fans were never meant to hear about. Messages allegedly stopped mid-thread. Calls went unanswered. Appearances were quietly reevaluated. And suddenly, someone who was in the circle wasn't anymore. Then Masika gets pulled into the storm. Foota hype adds fuel with comments that instantly flip the narrative. Lady Saw allegedly steps in with a sharp rebuke that shocks longtime fans. And just like that, what looked like a simple misunderstanding turns into a full-blown industry divide. Now social media is on fire. Clips are being rewatched frame by frame. Old interviews are being decoded like evidence. Fans are arguing, picking sides, and digging up history that nobody was even talking about yesterday. But the real question is getting louder by the minute. Was Stephen D. Genius just cut off by Kartel, or was this a calculated message sent to everyone watching in silence? The moment that silence hit, the entire dancehall space didn't just react, it froze. Because fans immediately recognized something unusual about this situation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy on the surface. There was no direct confrontation, no public back and forth, no clear statement explaining what just happened. Instead, everything shifted in a way that felt intentional, controlled, almost too precise to be random. And that's exactly why people started paying closer attention. Within hours, clips started circulating online showing past interactions, old interviews, and performances that suddenly felt different in hindsight. Fans began dissecting body language, tone, and even small pauses in conversations that, at the time, nobody thought twice about. Now, those same moments were being replayed like hidden clues. Social media didn't just discuss it, it went into full investigation mode. Some users claimed there were signs of tension weeks ago, pointing at subtle changes in interviews where energy felt slightly off. Others dismissed it completely, calling it overanalysis and typical internet exaggeration. But the debate only made the situation louder. Because in today's music culture, silence is never just silence anymore. And while the public was busy decoding everything from the outside, the industry side of things was reportedly even more tense. People close to the scene began hinting that conversations had been happening behind closed doors, conversations that never reached the public eye. Not accusations, not confirmations, just vague suggestions that things changed suddenly. That alone was enough to keep the rumor mill spinning. Meanwhile, Stephen D. Genius found himself at the center of a storm he never publicly acknowledged in detail. No long statement. No emotional breakdown online. Just distance. And in this era of entertainment, distance itself becomes a statement whether you intend it or not. The silence created space for narratives to grow. And that's where things started getting messy. Because once Masika's name entered the conversation, everything shifted from isolated speculation into something much bigger. Fans began connecting dots that may or may not have been connected at all. Past collaborations were re-examined. Past performances were re-watched. Even friendly moments were suddenly being analyzed like they had hidden meaning. Foota hype's commentary added even more fuel to the fire. One statement, one reaction, one interpretation, and suddenly, the internet treated it like confirmation of a deeper divide. Not necessarily because anything was officially proven, but because people were already looking for answers, and anything emotional felt like validation. Then came Lady Saw's involvement in the wider conversation, which shifted the tone again. Her reaction wasn't just seen as commentary, it was treated as a signal. Fans began saying, if she's reacting, then something must be happening. Whether that was true or not didn't matter anymore. Perception had already taken over reality. At this point, the situation stopped being about one moment and turned into a narrative war online. Two sides formed almost instantly. One side believed this was a clear industry fallout that just hadn't been officially addressed yet. The other side insisted it was all exaggerated internet storytelling with no real foundation. Both sides were using the same clips, the same interviews, and the same silence, just interpreting them differently. And that's what made it so powerful. Because in entertainment, once a story reaches this stage, truth and perception start blending together. Even neutral fans who weren't taking sides started to admit something felt off, not because of anything confirmed, but because of how fast the conversation escalated from nothing to everything. One moment, there was normal industry chatter, and the next, timelines were filled with breakdowns, theories, and emotional reactions. But the most interesting part wasn't the noise. It was the absence of clarity from the people at the center. No direct interviews addressing the situation. No clear explanations. No attempt to fully shut down or confirm anything. Just silence. And in the digital age, silence spreads faster than any statement ever could. And as the conversation kept growing, one question started dominating everything. Was this actually a deliberate industry move being misinterpreted by fans? Or is the internet finally seeing cracks in a space that was never as unified as it looked? Because the deeper people looked, the more complicated it seemed. And just when it felt like the story might settle into simple online debate, something else started circulating in private group chats and fan pages that completely changed the direction of the discussion again. And that's where everything begins to shift into even deeper territory. The moment that new wave of private chatter started spreading, the entire conversation shifted again, but this time, it wasn't coming from public interviews or visible posts. It was coming from screenshots, voice note claims, and secondhand insider stories that nobody could fully verify, yet everyone was still sharing. And that's exactly what made things spiral even faster. Because once a story leaves the official space and enters private circulation, it becomes something else entirely. It stops being about facts and starts becoming about interpretation, emotion, and assumption. Every person adds their own angle, their own belief, their own twist, until the original situation is almost unrecognizable. That's what was happening here. People who were following the situation closely started noticing how quickly narratives were evolving. One minute, it was about alleged distance. Next minute, it was about supposed behind-the-scenes tension. Then suddenly, it was being framed as a larger industry pattern, like this wasn't just one isolated situation, but part of something much deeper happening in dancehall as a whole. And once that idea takes hold, everything gets magnified. Old interviews were pulled back into circulation, especially moments where subtle disagreements or differences in tone could be interpreted in multiple ways. Fans began rewatching performances with a completely different mindset, as if they were looking for hidden meaning that was never intended to be obvious in the first place. That's how the narrative grows, not from new evidence, but from reinterpretation of old moments. Meanwhile, the names involved in the discussion continued to be pulled further into the spotlight by online debate. Masika's presence in the conversation became more symbolic than direct. Instead of being about any specific action, his name started being used as a reference point for alignment and distance, depending on which side of the argument people were on. Foota Hype's earlier commentary was also being replayed constantly, broken down line by line as if it contained hidden confirmation. Some people treated it like insight. Others called it exaggeration. But either way, it kept the conversation alive and expanding. Lady Saw's earlier reaction, which might have been just a passing comment in another context, was now being elevated into something far bigger online. Fans began connecting it to broader industry tension, even though no direct link was ever clearly established. This is how digital storytelling works now. Context gets stretched until it fits the narrative people want to believe. And in the middle of all this, the silence from the key figures involved became even more noticeable. Because in situations like this, silence doesn't just mean no comment anymore. Online audiences treat silence as space, and space always gets filled. If there is no explanation, people create one. If there is no confirmation, people assume patterns. If there is no denial, people start treating speculation like hidden truth. That's how perception starts replacing reality. At the same time, fan communities began breaking into smaller factions. One group insisted the situation was being completely overblown, pointing out that the entertainment industry thrives on exaggerated narratives and recycled drama. Another group argued that too many coincidences were lining up for it to be ignored, even if nothing was officially confirmed. And then there was the third group, the ones who weren't fully convinced either way, but were still emotionally invested in the unfolding story simply because of how unpredictable it felt. That group is usually the most powerful online because they keep watching. As engagement increased, so did the pressure on every new piece of information, no matter how small. Even a single comment on a live stream, a single caption change, or a deleted post was enough to spark new theories. People weren't just consuming content anymore, they were actively building a narrative in real time. And that's when things reached a new level of intensity. Because now, the conversation wasn't just about whether something happened. It was about what could have happened behind closed doors that the public was never meant to see. Anonymous posts began circulating claiming that conversations within the industry had become careful and selective, with people choosing their words more cautiously than before. Again, nothing was verified, but the tone of these claims added fuel to the already burning speculation. And the more cautious everyone became in real life, the louder the internet got. Every pause in communication was now being analyzed. Every lack of response was being dissected. Even unrelated industry interactions were being pulled into the same narrative thread, as if everything was connected by default. But the truth is, when a story reaches this level of attention, it stops being about the original moment entirely. It becomes about interpretation. And interpretation is where things either settle down or explode even further. Because just as the conversation started to feel like it might stabilize into ongoing debate, a new angle emerged, one that suggested this situation might not just be about personal distance or misunderstanding at all. Instead, some users began framing it as part of a larger shift happening inside the industry structure itself, where alliances, visibility, and influence are constantly being reshaped behind the scenes. That idea changed everything again. Now, it wasn't just fans debating personalities, it was fans trying to map power, influence, and positioning in an industry that they don't fully see from the outside. And once that mindset takes over, every silence becomes louder, every gap becomes meaningful, and every unanswered question becomes part of a bigger puzzle that feels impossible to fully solve. But just when it seemed like the discussion had already reached its peak intensity, another layer started forming, one that suggested the story might not even be close to its final stage. As that bigger puzzle narrative started taking over the internet, the entire conversation shifted from speculation about individuals into something much more unstable: collective theory building. At this point, people weren't just reacting to information anymore, they were actively constructing a storyline out of fragments, memories, and assumptions that may or may not have been connected in the first place. And that's where things got even more unpredictable. Because once audiences start treating disconnected moments as part of a single hidden pattern, every new detail, no matter how small, feels like confirmation. A pause in an interview becomes evidence. A missing appearance becomes intentional. A vague comment becomes coded messaging. The story stops being anchored in reality and starts floating in interpretation. That's exactly what was happening here. Different fan communities began merging separate discussions into one massive narrative thread. What started as a conversation about tension and distance slowly expanded into debates about influence, loyalty, and positioning within the wider dancehall ecosystem. People weren't just asking what happened anymore, they were asking why things always seemed to shift so suddenly in the industry. And that question pulled in even more unrelated moments. Old collaborations were reevaluated under new assumptions. Past interviews were rewatched with suspicion. Even harmless jokes from years ago were suddenly being interpreted through a completely different lens. The internet has a way of doing this. It doesn't just remember content, it reinterprets it based on the present emotional temperature. Meanwhile, the silence from the main figures involved continued. And the longer that silence lasted, the more powerful the narrative became on its own. Because in digital culture, silence doesn't stop a story, it accelerates it. It gives space for imagination to take over. And imagination, when shared across millions of users, starts to feel like consensus. At this stage, even neutral observers were beginning to notice how fast the conversation was evolving without any official updates. The situation no longer depended on facts being added, it was being driven by engagement loops, reactions, and reinterpretation cycles. Every new post referencing the topic, even indirectly, was enough to restart the entire discussion from scratch. And then came the emotional layer. Because beyond the theories and analysis, fans were reacting emotionally to the idea of distance, change, and possible fallout within a space they cared deeply about. For many, dancehall isn't just entertainment, it's identity, history, and cultural connection. So when perceived tension enters that space, it doesn't feel like gossip. It feels personal. That emotional investment is what keeps the story alive long after the original moment fades. As conversations intensified, some users started framing the situation as a reflection of how quickly relationships in the music industry can shift under pressure. Others pushed back, arguing that audiences often misunderstand normal business distance and turn it into drama for engagement. Both perspectives kept the discussion going because both contained a piece of truth. But the most interesting part was how quickly the narrative stopped needing new events to survive. The story had already reached self-sustaining mode. Every repost, every reaction video, every breakdown analysis added fuel without requiring anything new to actually happen. And that's when the conversation reached its most unstable point. Because now, even unrelated industry activity was being pulled into the same orbit. A performance clip here, a studio appearance there, everything was being measured against the ongoing narrative, as if every action needed to be interpreted in relation to the situation. At this stage, it didn't matter whether there was ever a single defining incident. The perception itself had already become the story. And in that kind of environment, truth and interpretation become almost impossible to separate cleanly. What makes this even more complex is how quickly online narratives can shift direction. One moment, the dominant theory might be about distance. The next, it might evolve into something about industry structure. Then it might shift again into something entirely different depending on which clip goes viral next. The story is no longer linear, it's reactive. And that means it can change shape at any time. As this situation continued to evolve, another subtle shift began happening in the background. People started moving from asking, "What happened?" to asking, "Why does this always happen in the industry?" That question widened the entire scope of discussion beyond any single artist or moment. It turned the conversation into a broader reflection on music culture, fame pressure, and how narratives are created and sustained in the digital era. And once a story reaches that level, it rarely resolves cleanly. Instead, it fragments into multiple interpretations that coexist at the same time, each supported by different communities, each reinforced by different pieces of selective evidence. So where does that leave everything? It leaves it in a space where certainty is no longer the point. What matters now is perception, engagement, and ongoing discussion. The story continues not because it has a conclusion waiting to be revealed, but because it has become part of a larger cycle of how audiences consume and reinterpret entertainment in real time. And in the middle of all of this, the original moment, the one that sparked everything, becomes less about what actually happened and more about what people believe it represents. Because in today's digital culture, the story doesn't end when silence continues. It evolves. Before you click away, think about this for a second, because this isn't just another entertainment breakdown. This is exactly how modern music culture is being shaped in real time, right in front of your eyes. Stories like this don't just live on headlines anymore. They live through your reactions, your comments, your theories, and the way you interpret every silence, every post, every subtle move in the industry. And that's what makes situations like this so powerful. They don't end when the video ends. They continue in the conversation you have after it. So now the real question is in your hands. Do you think this whole situation is being completely overanalyzed by the internet? Or do you believe there's actually something deeper happening behind the scenes that people are slowly starting to notice? Because the truth is, every viewer sees a different version of the story. Some see industry politics. Some see misunderstandings being turned into drama. And some see a much bigger shift happening in how power, influence, and silence operate in music today. And your opinion actually matters here, because the more people talk, the more patterns start to form. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell exactly where you stand on this. Are people reaching too far, or is the industry finally being decoded in real time? If you enjoy content like this, the deep dives, the breakdowns, the stories behind the stories, then don't just watch and leave it here. Hit the like button so this reaches more people who follow the culture, subscribe so you don't miss the next update, and turn on notifications because the next story that drops could shift the entire narrative again. And trust me, if there's more to this situation, you'll want to be here when it unfolds.